Hey guys, Mr. Poke here, back with another video, and on today's episode of CN Unit Analysis, we are going to be taking a look at Castorice, right? And I've really covered extensively regarding how her performance is like in the various endgames for the different light cones, team compositions, circle usage with Mimi as well as Sunday. So feel free to take a look at the creator early access for that. But for today's video, as per all of my CN analysis, we're going to be taking a look at a more in-depth look as to exactly how does the kit performs, any advanced gameplay tips, as well as specifically the proper speed tuning with regards to both Sunday and Mimi, as well as essentially unraveling whether or not Sunday is truly going to be synergistic or rather the lack thereof. Right? So without further ado, let's just jump in right now. So in summary, Castorice herself, she does have an extremely high base multiplier, as you can see from the dragon's final hit, and her mechanic of this damage, right? This would come from how quickly can you gain Newbud from either taking damage from the enemies or taking healing from your teammates. And as of right now, we can see that the total dragon's HP is going to be 34,000, and the maximum amount you can heal per single ally is going to be at 12%, right? So that's going to be essentially 4,080 Newbud generated per time. Currently, we also have the very decent free-to-play alternative, even for players that do not have Tribbie, because you can technically still use Rame with a rest pen field and doesn't really perform too far off from all of our endgame content. But the main thing is basically our signature light cone, because we really don't have any good alternatives to a signature light cone, because all of the other signatures is performing at least 20% worse than the signature. Otherwise, you can literally just use the high HP base health just for the raw stats, right? So that's gonna be that. Are you running low on Castorice funds? Well, worry not, because LD Shop is here. Developed by LD Player Emulator, a former game top-up platform, LD Shop offers HSR top-ups from a 13% off and more. All you need is your server and game ID and you're all set. It's safe, reliable, and almost instant, as you can see from this process over here. Simply take a look at the prices of the items in-game in LD Shop, like the Express Pass and 8080 on-rig shards. Currently, there is a further 5% discount on the 8080 shards available from 1 day before the version update, and you can apply the 10 or 5% off coupon with my link too. Users registered using my link will also receive this coupon, which can save you a maximum of $50. First top-up bonuses can be activated here as well, and spending over 80 USD will gain you VIP, which rewards you with a free supply pass. Check out the link in the description to top up now. One very important thing to note is that I think we've shared the same sentiments. CN does believe that this global passive, right, this Hankuji, it doesn't really impact that much, because they are also making a comparison to Aircron's overroll technique, which, even though this is not going to be in the case for the endgame, but it does have a much higher degree of impact for casual player base, especially in the overall enjoyment of HSR, right? So if you are thinking of pulling Castorice just for the sake of global passive, he would advise against it. Or rather, multiple CN creators has also advised against pulling Castorice strictly for the sake of global passive, because if you take a look over here, if you want to compare Castorice damage performance with the other version 3 DPS, namely Herda, Aglea, or even Maide, you can see that her performance is really not that game breaking. And one of the main reasons for why this is also because the anti-synergy that she sort of presents herself with in Sunday, right? So we're going to take a look into the performance a little bit later, but essentially, if you do want to pull for Castorice, main reason should be because if you're still using a version 1 or a version 2 DPS and you didn't receive any substantial upgrades. For example, if you have been using Firefly but you did not pull for Fuke, or you have been using any of these above, version 1 DPSs, you can in fact at this point consider pulling for Castorice, because you didn't invest that much into their cost back then as well, right? So from this perspective, if you're strictly talking about strategies, return on investment, then a brand new Castorice team would bring you more benefits, right? So that is essentially going to be that. In terms of relics, in the summary, exactly the same: 4-piece foil, 2-piece bone, triple HP percentage with a crit damage body. That is pretty much going to be best in slot. Don't really have too much to discuss. Signature light cone, you can see these alternatives also discussed in early access. That's in summary. So I'm just going to be jumping through the talent, the portions, and everything. So feel free to take a look at the creator early access to take a look at how we basically break down pretty much their entire kit over there. So we're just jumping straight into the advanced combat mechanics, and the first thing is, how do you exactly play Castorice? Because there are basically two different modes. One is, you let the dragon survive and you deal damage with the enhanced skill for the grouping, right? This is going to be your group AoE target. Or you want to go for the self-destruct dragon, which is going to be you instantly summon the dragon, instantly kill the dragon, and then you want to summon the dragon as fast as possible again, right? So one of the benefits, if you want to go for the AoE hit, you can see that if you are dealing with a lot of mobs, especially if it just lasts for that one wave, then this AoE from the enhancing on Castorice is going to be quite nice, because it is going to be considered as a joint attack, right? Also keep in mind that it does also provide the 20% rest pen when this field is up, which is only available when the dragon is up, up. So your additional units such as Tribbie, your Tribbie's ultimate, Tribbie's follow-up, or any of your other secondary DPS, they can also receive this additional damage output during a time when the dragon is alive, which is not something that you can accomplish if you were to instantly kill the dragon every single time, right? So their DPS can also go up by a little bit. But generally speaking, almost every single scenario, you do want to use this DPS output, which is you kill the dragon every single time, because the main thing is essentially you cannot generate new blood while the dragon is on field. So even though you technically lose the rest pen field if the dragon were to die and you have to wait for it to come back up again, the overall damage increase is still going to be worth it because the dragon itself just deals that much more damage, right? So in a grand scheme of things, unless you are going to be playing this with Sunday, dragon dying every single time and then you revive the dragon as fast as possible with your heals and damage would be the play style for almost every single endgame content, right? And to a certain extent, you can basically just press the fun button and it will just do the exact same thing that you have done if you were to play it manually, unless you are going to be using for Sunday, right? So if you can see over here, if you do want to use Sunday, then you definitely need to turn on the fun button because Sunday is not going to fully effectively use the kit, which is, kill the dragon every single time, because it plays into a completely different play style, which you can see a little bit later on, right? So now we want to talk a little bit about the new bot generation. So as you can see from now, currently we have 3 different ways, which is Castorice herself drains the target's HP, healers bringing us our health back, as well as the enemy team dealing damage to your entire units, right? So at this current point, the one good thing about this energy generation is compared to My Day relies a lot more on the enemy dealing damage to your entire team. Unfortunately or fortunately for Castorice, she's not that reliant on the enemies and she can actually perform these health drain just by her normal skill without using any skill points. It will just drain your entire team's HP for 399. On top of that, your additional sustains from Gallagher's, from your Gallagher passive, your Luocha, it also contributes quite a bit towards the new bot generation. So in this current point of time, you do want to see that because you generate a lot more charge, a lot more new bot from the amount of HP you drain and heal, getting your team to be as high of a health as possible would lead to you generating more new bot, because Castorice's skill takes into percentage of the target's max HP. And then if you want to take a look at your sustains, using abundant sustain like Gallagher and Luocha or even Lingsha is almost going to be non-negotiable, because you essentially want to always bring this heal up as fast as possible in order to get the dragon up as fast as possible, right? So one important thing to note is that for Castorice, her skill also consumes your Mimo sprite HP. Sometimes you might want to consider not leveling Mimi's HP tracers just so that she can die a little bit early and get a 50% extra charge. But because of this brand new mechanic, which is tied to your max HP, upgrading Mimi's HP tracers would lead to higher new bot generation for Castorice herself, right? So in this sense, aside from Mimi, in the future, if we get more and more Mimo sprites, right, from your supports, from your sustains, for example, like Hyacinth, if she's going to be a sustain, then all these additional Mimo sprites, they can contribute towards the new bot generation for Castorice, which means that she can cast her dragon even faster if you have more teammates to burn the HP, right? So in summary, after considering the damage output as well as the energy regeneration, you pretty much always let this dragon die as fast as possible to do the highest possible damage, unless you are going to be using the Sunday. And of course, Castorice herself, she doesn't consume any skill points, so you can pretty much just spam all of your skills for her supports and your sustains in order to give her even more healing. So for example, spamming your RMC skills, spamming your Gallagher skills, etc, etc, right? So that's pretty much it. Okay, this is going to be a special segment which is tied to specifically Sunday himself. Probably have seen one of my videos recently, which is this situation was even worse than Glow Passive, which is Sunday's synergy with Castorice herself. It has a lot of anti-synergy points, which is the buffs from Sunday, it doesn't get applied to the dragon unless the dragon is already on field at the same time, which is worse than even Mimi, because even RMC doesn't really suffer this same fate, which means that the Sunday's actual performance in combat, especially at E0, it is extremely comparable to your RMC, right? So you can see over here, one of the justifications that this has been brought up, which is Sunday was created not exactly just in mind of Castorice, but also to buff up our old DPS, such as your version 1 DPS, in this case Jingyuan, which has received a substantial buff, bring him to likely tiers of version 2, extremely competitive for all of our endgame environments, right? So one of the reasons why this is, it can also be kind of classified by the character itself, because Sunday's synergy with Jingyuan, in this case the kit, it works so well to the point where Jingyuan was a 1.0 DPS, was able to keep up with version 2 DPS output. This sort of begs the question, if Sunday was truly that synergistic with Castorice, in a sense that, for example, if the dragon didn't die every single time, or if the buff gets applied to the dragon every single time, even if the dragon was not summoned, what if at this current point of time, their power scaling would be so strong to the point where she basically outclasses the entire version 3 DPS, which would lead to an inevitable situation of an extremely concerning power creep, because let's be scenario, if Sunday worked that well with Castorice, then all of the previous version 3 DPS, they will pale in comparison. For Dherta, for Maide, and especially for Eidolons, which is supposed to be, extremely synergistic with Sunday herself, right? So another thing to consider is if they were to make Sunday that synergistic with Castorice and they wanted to nerf this power, right? So for example, because right now, if as things where it stands right now, if they release this kit and they make this that strong to balance out the potential power creep issue, which is, Castorice is dealing way too much damage compared to our older version 3 DPS, they will nerf Castorice damage multipliers, right? They built Castorice with the design that, okay, you want to use her with Sunday, so since Sunday is going to be that synergistic with Castorice, they will reduce Castorice damage multipliers, but because of the fact that Sunday herself, if Sunday was that synergistic, it would bring Castorice up to the baseline with around her version 3 DPS counterparts, right? So if they did do it this way, a Castorice with this nerfed multipliers without Sunday would be extremely bad. So if you were a player that pulled for Castorice today, but you did not pull for Sunday back then, and Castorice receives the nerf multipliers, then you would see that her combat performance would then pale in comparison, like pale a lot more in comparison compared to Dherta, Eidolons, and Maide, because you didn't pull for Sunday, which could be a very similar situation like Eidolons, because Eidolons by herself without Sunday, her performance, her ultimate time to join attack is not going to be that smooth, but now that you do pair Eidolons or Sunday, her damage DPS is going to be a lot higher, right? So I guess this is one of the reasons as to why they sort of designed this anti-synergy with Sunday in mind, so that her power is not going to completely break the game balance for version 3, right? So that is pretty much going to be one of the perspectives as to why Sunday did not rise that well with Castorice. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Castorice's current in-combat performance. I sort of done a very similar thing in my early access review where I basically compare with all of the DPSs. I'm also going to be testing out Castorice in the future videos where I'm going to run with every single support on top of different DPS comparison of version 3. So in this current point of time, best in slot is going to be seen as follows: RMC plus Tribbie plus sustain, namely going to be Gallagher or Luocha. So generally, even from the before you pull Castorice, you can see from her endgame performance, you can see that she's definitely going to be extremely favorable, especially for our current memory of chaos, and all of the buffs are basically catered towards the HP drain mechanics, right? So for Apex Shadows as well as Pure Vision, if they were to remove away these MOC buffs, or even in Memory of Chaos, and especially with the enemy design, then we could see Castorice's performance getting a little bit lower, especially if you do not have Tribbie. So in this scenario, I want to talk a little bit more, which is what happens if you did not pull Tribbie or Castorice, and you are in the end using the, more free-to-play alternative, which is going to be either Pella or Ranmei or even Jiao Qiu, right? In this case, you essentially go from a 1-turn to 2-turn cycle clear against Flame Weaver to a 2-turn to 3-turn clear cycle. So even without Tribbie, the actual performance of the current endgame MOC is not to the point where she's unplayable. She definitely suffers quite a decent chunk without Tribbie, especially considering the environment right now also favors these entire erudition and HP-based archetypes, right? But definitely still playable, basically going from clearing in 400 action value to 500 action value. So the final impact is not going to be that impactful. And then for your Luocha and Gallagher replacement, there are essentially no change, and in Pure Vision specifically, Gallagher's performance is going to be a little bit more sus because you cannot really maintain the Besotted debuff on every single enemy, and you kind of have to replay every single time, right? And then considering the fact that we also do get a free Ranmei for players that just started out playing the game, you miss Tribbie's banner, she is gonna be a very decent pairing of Castorice. And if you were to pair this up with RMC even on top of the E1 Ranmei with the Castorice defense reduction light cone, then you can see that this performance is honestly not gonna be that far off, even when you want to compare this to a E0 Tribbie, right? So it's still a very satisfactory performance for pretty much all of our endgame content. With the performance of Castorice being basically implanted as well as discussed, we are going to be going through a couple of Castorice's potential problems in her kit, especially if you want to look forward into future versions. So one of it, which is going to be the damage multipliers. So you can take a look at Castorice's damage multipliers, right? One of this is a little bit comparable to Firefly, but for Firefly so far, she has performance, especially with the field upgrade, she's going to be quite consistent, whereas for Castorice, she's not going to be that tight towards a Firefly's potential weakness. That is going to be toughness, lock enemies, and she doesn't really care that much because she is going to be a straight crit DPS, right? But one of the things that does need to be brought up, which is going to be the signature light cone. Signature light cone, the synergy with Castorice is honestly very high at its current point of time. Don't really have any other good alternatives if you want to talk about the Battle Pass light cone or the free HP light cone. They all pale in comparison from a damage number, and not to even mention we do have the 12% action value advance, which is going to be extremely favorable if you want to pair up with units like Sunday, right? One thing to note is that, like I mentioned in my own video, Boundless Courier, which is going to be an Aircron 4-star alternative, it technically did came out after a couple of months, so eventually probably most likely there would be a 4-star alternative that can be a little bit closer to a Signature Lycon performance, but at that point we are just speculations, right? And then one more weakness which is going to be this. On the point of the Signature Lycon as well as a personal damage output, which is like I mentioned just now, the multipliers for Castorice. So one of the Castorice kit, if you want to kind of break it down, the dragon itself, it actually functions very similarly to Argenti, in a sense where Argenti's first launch was you first do an AoE hit and then you implement the bouncers onto the main target. Technically for Castorice, this is essentially the same thing but with extra steps. If you want to, assuming that you want to kill the dragon every single time, because the longer the dragon stays alive, the less charge you get, assuming that you can kill all of the minions, which is definitely going to be the case right now, then all of the bouncers for the final wing attack can then be focused onto the main target, right? But in the future, if we do have, you know, HP inflation and the rest of the minions, they are unable to get released or rather they get killed by the very first dragon, then the final bounce from the wing attack is gonna be basically wasted on the minions, which will lead to an extremely awkward scenario, a little bit similar to how Argenti back then. At first it was very strong because his enhanced ultimate could pretty much kill every single mob and then just focus on elites, right? But nowadays, with HP inflation, doesn't really matter anymore. So in this very similar vein, with increased HP, especially for the mobs, Castorice Dragon could face a potential bounce issue, and you will essentially need to sort of fix this with either, you know, vertical investments like your E1 and E2, or if they want to pull for even stronger supports that can bring up Castorice's personal damage output, right? So that's going to be that. And then one more problem, which is going to be Castorice's reliance on a sustain. Now, this is technically not a problem for majority of player base that are just looking to play this game casually, but from CN at least, if they are talking about the absolute highest damage output, especially for a lot of the zero cycles in the CN community, running a sustainers is almost mandatory for pretty much every single unit. And Castorice herself as a unit, she definitely needs a sustain. It is pretty much non-negotiable. If you do not run a sustain with Castorice, chances are the performance is often at times worse than if you were to run a sustain, because you literally cannot charge enough HP to generate for the Newbud as well as the dragon itself, right? So in this case, if you compare a sustainers DPS output such as Herda, such as Aglaia, such as, you know, for example, even My Day, their damage output is actually a lot higher in this setup because Castorice currently doesn't really have another sustain that can help you deal as much as damage as possible in order to basically take her to the same DPS compared to a triple support plus 1 DPS ultra hyper carry setup, right? So in this sense, because Castorice is pretty much almost always tied to your sustain, it can even be viewed as a case where her damage output might not even be that high if in the future similar DPSs can come out that can basically run without a sustain. For example, even though Firefly, she was deemed as a very universal DPS back in version 2, and universal unit, girlfriend experience, run with the Fugue Rame, but you can still run Firefly sustainers by basically taking away either Lingsha or Gedgar and slot in a Harmony Trailblazer. And this triple sustainers team for Firefly is pretty much Firefly's highest damage output. And for Castorice, it is unlikely that this would ever be the case unless we see another sustain in the future that literally deals the same amount of damage or provides the same amount of utility comparable to a, you know, a pure support unit. But by the time this support unit comes around, and if it's going to be that synergy to Castorice, it may or may not also affect the game's balance in terms of the power progression. So that's pretty much it. So with all that out of the way with the weaknesses, now let's jump straight into the team building portion. I've already mentioned this is pretty much the best in slot team for a sustain. It is not that big of a deal because essentially they're all around the same caliber, but eventually when the higher scene does come out, I do believe that this would be a much more substantial upgrade compared to any of these three above. So TLDR, if you're thinking of using the selector for Luocha, I highly advise against it. Just to the Gallagher. And if you do want to get the higher scene for the more, you know, I think it's going to be a more permanent upgrade, then you can go ahead with that, right? So just save your Luocha for now if you're thinking about betting a better sustain, right? Don't really need to talk about this team anymore. If you have another example, which is going to be Jiao Qiu RMC with the different supports, a little bit similar in the veins of Runmei. So either Runmei or Jiao Qiu in this slot without Tribbie, essentially these are the slot trees that will provide you the AoE field damage bar. So for Jiao Qiu, it's basically the damage vulnerability, and then for your Runmei, it's going to be the damage res pen, right? So for both of these characters, their roles are very important because the buffs are not tied to Castorice turns. And with Castorice and Mimi getting summoned a lot, buffs tied to Castorice itself would lead to a pretty fast buff coverage downtime. So you do want this slot tree where the debuffs or the buffs are going to be there essentially no matter how many turns Castorice takes place, right? So of course, this doesn't mean that if you do not have Tribbie, you go ahead and pull a Jiao Qiu just for Castorice. It's just that if you already had a Jiao Qiu back then, you can consider running this for now until you eventually hopefully pull for the Tribbie rerun going forward in the future, right? Of course, if you already have a E1 Runmei synergy with Castorice is going to be even higher than Jiao Qiu because, you know, the defense reduction from the field is stacks on quite nicely with the defense reduction from her signature Lycon, right? For currently, even for E0 Runmei, there's technically not that much of a difference, but generally still slightly better performance compared compared to Pella. Pella, in theory, gives you a higher DPS output on paper because the defense is ignored with the resolution. It can stack on with the signature light cone, especially for players that are just basically looking for the absolute highest possible damage. But outside of like these kind of like very niche scenarios, just for comfort, utility, as well as the energy and skill point generation from run mate, if you put for the signature, then run mate is gonna be a little bit more recommended, right? If you do not have any of these, then honestly, running Pella is not even going to be that bad. Same thing as Xiao Qiu or the Luocha. You shouldn't be using a token for run mate just for Castorice for the sake of slotting in because you have nobody else, right? Because at the end of the day, the moment Tribbie comes out in the future in the rerun, then her value is going to be a lot more important, and I will highly recommend players to basically just wait for the rerun instead of using their pools right now to get basically a temporary damage buff, which at the end of the day is around the same level investment for the Ezio. So that's going to be that. For the Luocha perspective, right, keep in mind that for the Luocha's field, the field cooldown time, it happens after his turn ends. So there will always be a downtime for Luocha's field that the field is going to expire. So in a sense, Luocha would technically never achieve a 100% field uptime because of this pretty unfortunate glaring error. Generally speaking, and also keep in mind, if you are going to be running Luocha on the Castorice, you could even consider running a attack percentage rope instead of an energy regeneration rope because the single target heals actually doesn't really hit the 12% max threshold, which is going to be 4080 every single time, right? So in this sense, running the attack rope and then just running a couple of energy regeneration or just higher light cones that can help us circumvent this issue, then you can gain a little bit more Newbud if you are going to be running Luocha, right? So to keep that into consideration. And then for Lingsha is also going to be another decent alternative for a sustain slot because for Lingsha herself, she also offers quite a decent chunk of AoE heals, AoE cleanse, as well as a little bit more utility compared to others. And then for the Sunday slot, I've already mentioned the Sunday thing a little bit more, quite extensively already. And towards the end of this video, I also want to give you guys a little bit more of a concrete example as to the actual performances and the speed tuning if you are going to be using Sunday or in this case Mimi with Castorice, right? So for the relics as well as the light cone portion, it's pretty much exactly the same, don't have any differences. So kindly check out the early access review for a couple more of the insights as to how do you actually build Castorice, right? Because I really want to jump into the topic where how exactly do you speed tune Castorice, especially her performances with the other team with actual numbers. One last segment before I jump into a more practical scenario, which is going to be the Eidolons segment. E1 is pretty much going to be a 23% final damage increase, very strong multiplier, but between this as well as the Signature Light Cone is going to give you a lot more value, so not much to be said over here. E2 TLDR, a lot of words explain this in the early access, but in summary, this is going to be a 42.8% higher ultimate damage multipliers, as well as this additional action value advance, which gives you this a free enhanced skill every single time before the dragon moves, which can help you fix one of Castorice's issue where if the minions do not die, then this additional enhanced skill can help you basically carry off the minions to focus on the elites over here, right? Very strong Eidolon too, with all the factors, all of the buffs, all of the new buff, all the multipliers combined. This is gonna be one, yeah, pretty much the strongest Eidolon to the entire game. More than 50% final damage increase for entire kit. So if you want to get it, sure, go for it. But at the base kit, she's still completely fine. A little bit similar to, you know, how Akron was first launched back then. E2 completely broke the game, then E0, you know, she's still extremely strong unit, right? So that's pretty much gonna be it. E3, E4, don't really too much to say. Yeah, and then for E6 generally it's gonna be exactly the same, right? Classic E6 deal a lot more damage, very strong performance in all of our 3 endgame content, and that pretty much does wrap it up for the Castorice guide. But I want to go into the more advanced segment, which is gonna be this right here. So this is gonna be a little bit more of an advanced segment as to how exactly do you build as well as play Castorice, as well as a couple of benchmarks that you guys can consider for references in the future if you do want to build up Castorice. So for example, Castorice, her build itself, you can see over here roughly 58% crit rate, 200 crit damage, E0 S1, 4-piece pole and 2-piece bone. For your substats value, it's gonna be 1.2% for HP percent, 2.1% for crit rate, and 1.5% for crit damage until you get as close to 100 crit as possible. Then you can basically go for crit damage slightly above HP percentage, right? You can see over here the differences is very similar. And then for your crit damage body or your HP body is also roughly 5% difference. And then for your HP sphere as well as your damage sphere, it is going to be almost the same, assuming that you are going to be using this team, right? So the playstyle for this team comp, which is Castorice, RMC, Tribbie, and Gallagher, always let RMC spam his E. No other reason to do anything otherwise because you get more heal and more Newbud if you heal up Mimi, right? And then the dragon dies as fast as possible to summon the dragon as fast as possible, right? And then for your RMC, one important thing to note over here is that you actually want to give RMC a HP percentage body instead of a crit damage body. So essentially what this works is because you have a higher HP, you technically gain more Newbud whenever Castorice use her normal skill. And you are really not sacrificing that much damage by sacrificing the crit damage because RMC itself doesn't really do that much anyways, even during the ultimate, right? So as a result, HP percentage body for RMC is going to be a little bit more valuable, especially when you want to consider summoning the dragon as fast as possible. For the light cone, it's going to be the Herda Star light cone running the either 4-piece ego, 2-piece speed, doesn't really matter that much. Just give them faster speed possible. If you want to run 4-piece Eagle, you can go for the 168 speed to try to hit the 200 speed in combat, right? And then for Tribbie, exactly the same. You can kind of run the 2-piece broken kill instead of 2-piece bone if you want your Tribbie to give us a little bit more 10% crit damage for our entire team. And then pretty much no other subset requirements, almost exactly the same. Then for Gallagher, pretty much always the same thing as our other builds. In summary, every single one of your other teammates for Castorice, they should always be on a HP percent, means that just so that Castorice can gain the highest number of new buffs whenever she used the Dragon Strike, right? So always run HP percentage main for pretty much your entire team. This is sort of like the final performances that this content creator has basically summed up everything for every single possible Castorice team with every single pretty much possible rotation. I'm going to be doing something very similar in my future channel as well, where I'm going to be using Castorice for, you know, every single DPS and every single support. So stay tuned for that in the future, but you can kind of just screenshot this for your own references. Generally speaking, you are basically hitting at most a 3-turn clear for this Memory of Chaos, and then the best possible zero cycle so far is going to be for the E2 S1 Castorice, and this is pretty much going to be one of, if not the best, a very first try zero cycle, absolutely zero RNG, which is going to be E1 S1 Sunday with E2 S1 Castorice, and then E2 S1 with RMC. Also got a zero cycle, but definitely need to grind a little bit more RNG, so that's for consideration, right? So this is going to be for the 3.1 Pure Fiction second half with buff 3. You can see that they also basically achieve a 40,000 clear with 1 cycle remaining, running these both exact same teams, running either Gallagher or Luocha. It's just that for Luocha itself specifically, it's going to be a little bit more comfortable because the field is going to be a little bit more easily maintained compared to Gallagher's, because Besotted does drop off with other different enemies, right? So I do want to point out this very interesting discovery, which is gonna be if you run RMC with 3 different main bodies: a crit damage body, a HP body, as well as a outgoing healing boost body, which technically outgoing healing boost can also increase your healing compared to crit damage. But I can see over here the healing generated from HP percentage main is actually going to be the highest, especially if you run the giant tree inner 2-piece, right? So at 4472, this is the highest, and you can see that your Mimi's crit damage conversion is going to be 13.2%. So if you do not bring your crit damage body, you essentially lose 8.5% team-wide crit damage, which honestly is not going to be the end of the world. So in summary, running a HP percentage main for RMC is going to give you the best bang for buck instead of running the crit damage, right? So a little bit more just for the faster charge is going to be worth it, generally speaking. Then specific for the Sunday segment, for the Sunday segment, we already know this team is going to be, you know, still performing not that badly, but you basically need to play Castorice in a different way compared to RMC, because you essentially want to hold the dragon first before Sunday brings up the dragon. As you can see from these 2 teams over here, one with RMC and one with E1 S1 Sunday, both of them managed to get the 1 cycle clear. But you can see over here with a E1 Sunday, the final damage performance is going to be slightly better than RMC at E0, but it's not going to be that much stronger compared to RMC even at this point. So generally speaking, it does in fact feel a lot more comfortable compared to E0 S1 Sunday. So in conclusion, from what they've tested so far, RMC is going to be stronger than E0 S1 Sunday, but E1 S1 Sunday slightly edges out the performance in terms of damage compared to RMC, right?
May death protect us!
So at this point, this is sort of like a summary, a table for players to consider if you want to build up a team with Castorice, as well as the different units that you want to use alongside with Castorice, right? So this is gonna be your aura support, which basically means the buffs are tied to the unit's turn itself, the field support, and this is gonna be the action value support. So from these 2 cases, you can see that T0 is gonna be Tribbie, then use either E1 S1 Sunday or E6 RMC. If you do not have a E1 S1 Sunday, then Sunday is gonna be slightly weaker compared to RMC, and if you do not have Tribbie, running an E1 S0 run is also going to be a pretty decent, not too bad of an alternative. Gallagher is actually going to be the best in slot sustain right now, which is going to be kind of crazy. Then both Luocha and Lingsha, they're going to be at tier 0.5. In pure vision specifically, Luocha doesn't really lose compared to Gallagher, but you do need to manual your Luocha a little bit more because you need to control when do you get the field up as fast as possible. And then for tier 1 alternatives, it's basically going to be a E1 S0 run. So this is assuming that you are not going to be running both RMC and Sunday at the same time. Then you can just kind of run a double aura support. support, which is going to be a run mate as well as a Pella over here, right? At this case, if you already have a, for example, RMC or Sunday, running a E0 S0 run mate is going to be a little bit worse compared to the E1 run mate. And then finally, Huo is going to be at tier 1 because unfortunately, Huo's energy regeneration doesn't really help us for the Newbud, and the heals are going to be considerably weaker compared to Gallagher, Lingsha, as well as Water. Right? So this is going to be a summary for you guys to use in your own reference. One important thing to know about Gallagher is that you can, maybe this is not just for Gallagher, but you can see that the outgoing healing, you can see the Battle Pass S5 is actually going to be the highest healing possible at 76,277, 100%, but the Gallagher signature is going to be coming at a very close second at a 94.24% final healing value, and this is going to be S1 of the Battle Pass Lyco, and then this is going to be using a break effect roll, and etc, etc. You can kind of see the performances, but generally speaking, these two are basically your best slot options for Gallagher himself. Keep in mind that for Lingsha, if you are going to be using Lingsha with Castorice, running an energy regeneration will run to a guaranteed 3-turn ultimate, but if you do to run an attack percentage roll, you are going to heal a roughly 8.3% faster compared to ER, but you need to basically get hit for 15 energy to ensure a 3-turn ultimate. So in this sense, you might want to consider running attack roll unless you are going for a lot more energy regeneration, which sometimes if you were to run ER roll, you could go for even a 2-turn ultimate here and there, right? So for your consideration, everything else is pretty much exactly the same. Another very interesting thing to take note over here is the team building situations between D Herta as well as Castorice, and I think this is going to be quite relevant to a lot of players that started in version 3. If you really put for D Herta and now you put for Castorice, how do you distribute your Tribbie as well as your different supporters? So over here, if you only have Sunday, you can run Castorice, Sunday, run May with D Herta, Saval as well as RMC. And then if you only have Tribbie, you can basically give Tribbie to your D Herta team with Saval, because at this point, if you especially have a E1 as a run May synergy with Castorice is going to be more problem compared to a run May synergy with D Herta, right? So it's always about opportunity cost, and you need to balance out a little bit more. But if you both lack Tribbie as well as Sunday, then you can consider something like this, where you basically run RMC plus run May for Castorice, and then you give Robin to D Herta as well as Saval, right? So these are basically tied to your own individual opportunity costs, right? For D Herta specifically, tier 0 is also Tribbie, and then tier 1 is going to be RMC Sunday, and tier 2 is going to be Barbin as well as Sparkle, right? So keep that into consideration. One last segment before I basically end on this entire video, the final segment, that is going to be the speed tuning, just to tell you guys to look a little bit more. This is going to be the speed tuning required. I know there are a couple of saying that you can run a 134 speed Sunday or you can run a 160 speed Sunday. No, right? This is pretty much best in slot, because assuming that you want to run this 124 with 118, you can effectively run this with a free S1 DDD Tribbie, but if you have an S5 DDD Tribbie, you can actually bring Sunday speed all the way down to 118 speed. So in this specific scenario, you can even consider running a HP boots if you actually can hit enough speed without running the speed boots, right? This is assuming that you do have DDD paired up with Sunday so that you can trigger this cycle rotation, because like I mentioned, Castorice, after she gets the speed buff, is going to be 125.4. So this allows Castorice to go before Sunday, and this has to be the best in slot build. Do not run a 160 speed Sunday just to tie up with the dragon. So this is definitely going to be the highest damage output, because you generate a lot more new buds if you go for 4 Castorice actions instead of 2 Castorice actions, right? And then one more little alternative is just if you do not have Tribbie, you can also consider something like this, 124 speed Sunday with a run May. Run May, you can also consider giving her Duns and Zuns, because considering the fact that she also has a free 10% speed buff, so that can also help you a little bit. So with that, we have come to the end. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, how the performance is like going to be for you. We're still going to be making a lot more Castorice content in the next couple of days, wholly overworking, so looking forward to that. The word of the day is going to be global. I don't know, right? Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, all the best. I'll catch you. See you guys next time. Take care.